Ledger is a writing podcast and is digital only for now. Today's guest is Christine Wenc, former staff member for The Onion and the author of Funny Because It's True, How The Onion Created Modern American News Satire, which is out right now in hardcover. Make sure you go grab a copy. Christine stopped by to chat about how she started researching the book in 2018, and it came out now in 2025. How searching for and maybe never finding the objective truth is just a part of reporting and writing in general. Coming to terms with the ways in which others can live in kind of like perceptually generated realities of their own that differ from ours, and how academics can stand to cut like a ton of words from everything that they are writing. She's an editor, so she can say that. Not only is her book an awesome history of The Onion, it's seriously a great look at print and news media and the massive shifts for everyone involved with all of those things, from publishers and writers on down to readers and eventually viewers, that took place between the late 80s and the early 2000s. Come for the funny news stories about The Onion being created by some just college people and managing to succeed and stick around, and also changing comedy writing forever. I really do believe they did that. But then you stay for the details about how monetizing news is maybe a necessary evil that we just keep making more and more evil. Why do we do that? Seriously, it's a great book. Lovely chat with Christine. I was super happy to talk about all the stuff that we got to talk about. I highly recommend her book if you enjoy any of those things that I just mentioned or anything else that we talk about in the interview. As for me, go to austinrwilson.com, check out my stuff. I have stories there, free comics, free short stories. I'm also currently reading scripts, my third year reading scripts for the Austin Film Festival down in Texas, and I'm ready to start taking story analyst, proofreading, and script coverage jobs, so hit up my contact page to reach out about that. I'll have a landing page up eventually for those jobs. It's coming soon, but for now, just use the contact page. You can also go to mosshartbooks.com. That's my independent bookstore that I own and run. I sell books through there. You can order stuff I can ship to your house. Check that out if you want to do that. And as always, make sure you like, subscribe, write a review, share the show with anyone you know that might enjoy it. It really does help, and I love knowing other people are finding the show. But as for now, here's my chat with author Christine Wenc. This kind of came up in the last interview that I did about how long everything takes in writing and publishing. And at one point in your book, you mentioned that you started researching it in 2018.
Yeah.
And as of today, it's been out for 2 weeks in 2025. So I really want to talk about that process from that research to when the book is published and how much of it was writing.
Right. Yeah. So I originally conceived of this project as an oral history. At the time, I loved Gene Stein's book about Edie Sedgwick. That was like, I used to carry that around in high school like it was the Bible. And I just really loved the oral history format. And I did not know that there's now like an oral history of like everything in the world, an oral history of Motley Crue or whatever. Anyway, but I started writing this as an oral history, one, because I knew that Onion people would be really good talkers. And I also thought it was kind of an immediate, it's like it gets you into the story really quickly. But I also, thought that it would be a faster way to do it. That just was not true in any way. And then the other thing is, when I started working, so I started it, like my original book proposal had an oral history. I had a couple of sample chapters and like the whole thing. And then as I was starting to write it, and really like finding the voice for it, I would say it took me probably a good 2 years to sort of figure out the voice for the book. And it just became really evident that, one, trying to cover 36 years with an oral history was going to be like a 15-volume, thing that no one would ever read. And also, there were a lot of things I wanted to say that I couldn't say in an oral history format, And I have a background in both academic history and creative writing and alternative journalism. And I was trying to like sort of mix all those methods together. And I was like, you know what? I can't do this as an oral history. So I already had the contract. I was like, it's not going to work. I can't do this. So like my first extension was because I completely changed the format of the book and like literally rewrote like a big chunk of it. But once I, finally figured out the voice, then it actually went fairly quickly. I'm like saying that with like air quotes, but it just took me a while to just figure that out,
Yeah.
and that my process is kind of like that. I sort of like fart around for like a really long time, and all of a sudden there's like this ta-da, that's it, and then I just like write the whole thing. So like I
Yeah.
did that with the book proposal too. Went through like multiple iterations, then all of a sudden I just wrote the whole thing in one day, and that was the one that got me the contract. So yeah.
Well, it's funny because I too am a huge fan of oral histories, and that's what like, I don't know if I read that this was an oral history or if someone had reviewed it that way, or how I had approached, but it's funny because it still hews close enough to that like subgenre that it feels really oral history-ish.
Yeah.
And I mean, I have one friend, my best friend, where if an oral history comes out, we're like, oh, here's a new one, because we love the format. It's so great.
Yeah.
There's so many we have waiting on us to read, and I've read one about Hunter S. Thompson and some others that are fantastic. And you still manage to like handle that genre in a way, and you also foreground all of these writers from The Onion in a way that was so interesting to me, because a lot of them don't have name recognition because they don't use bylines. So I kind of wanted to talk about how what your process and thoughts were around foregrounding the writers in a way that was going to make them familiar to the readers as you're going through the story.
Yeah, well, I mean, a couple of these people I've actually known for a really long time. I was on the very original staff of The Onion. I left before anything, like they got famous or anything. It was just like sort of locally known, but I did know like people like Todd Hanson. Like I knew him since before The Onion, right?
Yeah.
So I had like a personal connection with people, but I'm sort of an insider and an outsider to the story at the same time. So that, because I was an old Onion person, later people, I knew they would be willing to talk to me, and like talk to me in a more kind of intimate or immediate way than maybe they wouldn't with someone who didn't know what it was like. Because The Onion is like, there's such a strong culture that like no one knows about, and I really learned a lot of that as I was working on it, because there was still a part of my brain that was like, oh, The Onion, like this thing my friends made in college, and I didn't really understand until I started working on the book, like how influential it had become and all the other things they did. Like I knew nothing about the Onion News Network, like none of that stuff. But it was also really important because I knew that the people who had really made the Onion what it was. I mean, I just watched the movie about Lord Michaels and the first night of Saturday Night Live, right?
Yeah.
And this morning I was like, the 1990 staff of The Onion, the people who were on the cover of the book, and a couple other people who weren't there the day they took that picture, they're like the original staff of Saturday Night Live, right? And no one knows who they are. No one knows what, which columns, like who wrote Jim Anchower anyway, like they in a different circumstance, they would probably be as famous as like the first staff of Saturday Night Live. But because it was The Onion and because everything is anonymous and because they were doing it in Madison, like no one knows who they were. And just as I met them and like, got to know them a little bit through the process, I was just like, they're all like insane, right?
Yeah.
Like there's like one unbelievable character after another, I would finish an interview and just be like, holy moly, these people are just spectacular, and it was just really great. And I just it was just important to me, and then there's other, his stories of the Onion, they're like kind of sketches of the early history of the Onion. And a lot of people they just don't really show up, or they're sort of made fun of. And I didn't like that. And I wanted that to be different. So
I was really, really interested in the portrayal of Scott. Is it Dickers?
Dickers, yeah.
And I wanted to talk about your approach to reporting, specifically with Scott Dickers and a couple other things, because Dickers is such an interesting, person. In the book, he feels like a character. I'm just interested how you report on someone that seems so divisive.
Yeah, that was a very strange experience for me, because I knew Scott back in the day.
Yeah.
And part of and as the course of, I became interested in this topic without Googling and discovering that, oh, there's a bunch of stuff about the early Onion. That's not right. Wait,
that's
what?
all wrong.
We're like, wait a second. Like, what? Huh? What? And I started asking other Onion people about it. And they're like, oh, yeah, he's been doing that for a while. And, we're not excited about it, but whatever. We've gone on to different things. And Yeah, it was weird. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, for
Yeah.
my listeners and anyone who hasn't read the book yet, Scott Dikkers played a large role in being a like business manager.
Well, no, he was like the sort of editor in chief kind of thing, but he would more like an executive editor sort of level, and then he would hire an editor to do most of the day to day, and then he would kind of zoom in and out, and he was very important in the history of the Onion. He was part of a group of three people who bought the Onion from the founders of the Onion, who were Tim Keck and Chris Johnson, and then he helped kind of push the sort of Gen X slacker staff into doing things and kind of making stuff happen, but enormous amount of like the actual day-to-day work was done by other people at the Onion. Yeah.
So I came across, and you mention it in the book even towards the end about Dikkers having a website saying that he wrote the first book the Onion did, which is called Our Awful Century.
Our Dumb Century.
Our Dumb Century.
Yeah.
And it's just like factually not true.
Yeah. And there were a bunch of things like that. Yeah. Anyway, they're including some personal things. I was like, that really didn't happen.
Yeah.
And so it was well, I mean, for me, it was this weird situation of, this is a person I know, this is a major, just from like a writer, like a journalist, historian point of view. Historians are sometimes, they're critical of journalists for relying too much on quotes and interviews, right? And this is like a sort of a good example of that in a way, because I got to this point where I was like, oh, you are a primary source for this project, but I don't know if I can, like, I'm not sure of the veracity of a lot of what you're telling me. And there was no way to check it a lot of the time.
So that is a perfect transition into the next question, which is, at one point you're talking to a guy named John Cruson.
Yeah.
And you are like literally quoted in the book that he is a habitual confabulator. Mm-hmm. So that's the part I and also about finding objective truth, that that's the sort of dream for journalism, and I love that you approach both of those things. One being like, a lot of people were telling me that Cruson isn't a habitual confabulator, and then also talking about the objective truth. And you even talk about being editor for the alt weekly The Stranger, and how you weren't objective and you didn't pretend to be.
Yeah. And I went to grad school in the history of science, and oddly enough, the concept of objectivity comes up. The history of science is not about the march of great scientists through time, at least that it's more about like, how do we decide what's real and who gets to say what's real and that kind of stuff. So that's kind of sort of swirling around in my mind. But yeah, I guess. Yeah, it was very weird. I mean, I was also researching this during the pandemic. There was other stuff happening that was, there was this sort of kind of veneer of unreality about a lot of things, and it was it was very strange situation. I think that, I mean, to me, like, you need to do good research, but it's important to not get bogged down in like the both sides thing, like as I describe in the book, because I also tell the story. I also took this opportunity when I'm writing this book to kind of tell the history of media and the news since the late 80s also, since that's what the Onion has been making fun of, the entire time. And I realized the Onion was so good at imitating, and they were really, the thing that fascinates me is the form and like the mediums that they're working in, which is so important. It's not just the what's in the content part, it's like how you're doing it, right? Yeah, and so I realized that, so I thought a lot about subjectivity during this whole process as well, and how it's really, really possible for someone to sort of be living in a different reality from you and like genuinely believe that their reality is correct, just like I believe my reality is correct most of the time. And it's weird. I used to, I don't know, like I used to be a person who tried to like convince people of my point, and now I'm like, you think what you think and I think what I think. And I don't know. I'm thinking about other things other than trying to prove that I'm right, if that makes sense. Yeah.
It's also weird to kind of come to terms with the idea that someone who lives in an altered reality or like their perception of reality is different, they're not necessarily doing that from a standpoint of someone who's like evil.
Right, exactly. Like they came up with like, does he believe this is true? And sometimes I'm like, yeah, maybe he does. Like, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then I was like, I'm not the person who's gonna make the call on, like it's not. I'm like, to me, it's more interesting that they're, here are characters who do these things, and I'm not gonna, see if that makes sense. So.
Oh yeah, no, and I think, I mean, it's weird because bringing in that bit of objectivity, being like, this is the thing that happened. I can't necessarily speak to who is right or wrong here, but I'm just going to present the things that this person said and this person said. And because I think that is rooted in objectivity of being this like third party, but also, and especially for The Onion and how they eventually shifted to the point of being like, no, we do have a perspective. We do have a point of view. We are very specifically writing these stories that are aimed in this direction. And this is like, I don't know Scott Dickers, but the idea of someone being like, no, I wrote that book, like that seems like complete anathema and like kind of uncool in a situation that really, really has, like, The Onion was rooted in the idea of like bucking against those kinds of things.
Yeah. And no one else from The Onion has really stood up and said, hi, I'm the genius behind The Onion. Like no one has ever done that,
Yeah, it's interesting. Another thing you said right towards the beginning, because you wrote for The Onion in those really early days, and your sort of disconnection from what The Onion had become, it reminded me of this quote in the book that Todd Hanson and Joe Garden are talking about, where they're talking about the other side of the screen.
Yeah.
Being on the other side of the screen, which means they're separate from this world of amazing art that they consume and that they love. Did that ring true to you as a writer, not just for The Onion, but just like a writer working in the Midwest? You're not on either coast. Like, tell me about that quote, being someone on the other side of the screen.
It's interesting because I lived, I grew up in rural Wisconsin, but then I went down to Seattle, did The Stranger, and then I lived on the East Coast for like 25 years. I was in New York and Boston for a long time. And that just struck me as one of the biggest differences between the Midwest and the coasts is that, and maybe this is different now, but at least in the, the 90s, like it just didn't enter anyone's mind that you could be a person who made media, and people were unbelievably elaborate, like connoisseurs of media, like I was like a music person. I had a show on the local community radio station, and like people had these unbelievably encyclopedic knowledges about all of this stuff. And some people did make things too, but I just, it just wasn't normal or a thing that people did here, partly because there's no industry for, you don't like walk down the street and walk past, oh, look, there's the Daily Show studio, like you do in New York. You don't like constantly run into people who are trying to write a screenplay or whatever, like you do in other places. And it's just a different mentality. And I mean, the upside of it is that I think people actually can sort of like develop their art, I mean, it's different now because of the internet. The internet kind of wrecked that, but there was this interesting period there where you could like really kind of stretch and work and make mistakes and, and nobody was watching and nobody cared. And you could like really develop stuff in a deep way that is different when you feel like there's like a spotlight on you all the time.
Yeah. And well, I mean, like I'm talking to you now, the internet changed so much so quickly that even The Onion, like my ability to find The Onion as a person who lived like in a cornfield in Indiana, eventually, like, because I was born in the late 80s, like it arrived on my doorstep digitally, not print. I'm curious about your interaction with the writers and the editors and the business people, everyone that you talk to from The Onion, about their perception of what The Onion accomplished. Because for me, it seems like they created almost this like blueprint that you can see now in like all of these memes and the way people write tweets and the way people even relay information about certain news stories, that they're doing it in a like Onion-like way. Did you notice any sort of perception of that? Like, I know some of the quote, the characters in the book maybe do perceive that in a little bit too grandiose of a fashion, but I'm just curious if you felt like that was a thing that had landed on them.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, people tend to imitate what they see, right?
Yeah.
And they imitate what they see on media. So I have no idea. I mean, there's also in a weird way, I almost felt like I didn't really talk to anybody about that particular topic. I don't think quite in the way you're talking about it. But what I felt when I was looking back at the old Onion, I was like, oh, the Onion was kind of doing it before the internet. I mean, there was like a style and a kind of response to media that seemed to just come up naturally when the internet happened.
Yeah.
And like the only reason I ever went on Twitter in the first place was for the jokes.
Yeah.
And then it turned into this other horror show. But yeah, I there's a way that I think what people do in like the next version of media, it sort of weirdly kind of reproduced what the previous version was, and then it goes off into something else. So I don't know I don't know, like someone could probably sit and map all that out. But yeah, I think that one of the big differences for sure between like the old paper Onion and the way the Onion is now is that the Onion didn't always respond to news on the day it happens. Like it was a much longer sort of process. And they were trying to write more. I really thought of the Onion as more like literary satire, especially in the 90s when it was a weekly paper. And then when, social media came in, then it turned into this thing that's, we're going to make jokes about the day's news. That's why like so many late night talk shows are populated by Onion writers, is because like they basically were doing that at the Onion, and then they went to TV and they did it again, and there are definitely some, there's like, the old Gen X folks are like, like, I don't know, it's, like it's, something's lost in that process, but, I'm sure people could argue with me about that too. So.
Watching through your book, how everything changed, I was thinking about as you're writing it, the process of writing it, because one of the best parts of it for me, I love the history of print journalism and just the entire world of that stuff. So watching you document essentially, like you said earlier in the interview, you're essentially writing the history of the Onion and the history of print journalism dying in the late 20th century. And at the same time, as you were researching and writing this, the world keeps changing.
Right,
so
exactly. Yeah,
the pandemic happens. We have a insane election. I'm curious how that affected your writing, just as the world is changing around you. Were you capable of, or was it hard, I guess, to separate all of these changes that are swirling around you as you're writing about all of these changes?
Yeah, it's interesting. I realized my response to sort of like I don't know, like grief and upset is to do research, right?
Oh.
And I'd gone through like a really major relationship breakup around this time as well. So like there were all of these things that were just sort of breaking and falling apart and not being the way they used to be. And it was like almost, I realize now that it was basically like therapy, to like, because I would laugh my head off just like continually, and to discover these new, like when I discovered the Onion News Network, I was like, I cannot believe how good this is. It just was so much more than I expected. But yeah, and I also just, just from like an intellectual point of view or historian point of view, I'm just like, well, how did this happen? And why did this happen? Technological changes they don't just like spring fully formed out of the head of Zeus or whatever, right? They happen because people made them, and there's like political decisions and economic decisions, and real media was going through all the same things that the Onion was going through. And I just thought, especially at this point in time, I just felt like it was really important to point out that like this stuff does have a history, and it's the result of choices that people made that things look the way they are. And to me, that also implies that we can choose something different and we can make it different if we want it to.
Yeah, I loved that aspect of the book, and reading about those early days of the Onion. And you have a great quote. You quote a book by Colin Harrison. The book's called American Culture in the 1990s. And the quote is, "Not even time or memory had inherent stability anymore." And that really hit me as like the quote of the internet and how that has changed our reality. So I kind of want to talk to you about that. But one of the aspects of it that hit me so much is that I was curious how much that played a part into your writing and like understanding of this book. Was this an attempt to maybe win back some of that inherent stability for defining the Onion and your place in it, or not even your place in it, but just that it existed and is not what it used to be, that it's changed because everything's changing.
Yeah, yeah. It was interesting how the internet, the internet changes reality. I mean, that kind of goes back a little bit to some of the Dickers stuff in a
Yeah.
way. I was just like, oh, this is how. I was like, wait a minute. In 100 years, if the thing is, people think the internet is forever. It's not forever. But if someone is trying to recreate a history of this newspaper for their dissertation in 2045 or whatever,
Yeah.
like they're going to get a totally like, because there's a sort of alternate history being constructed on the internet, which is incorrect, right?
Yep.
So it was weird to be sort of watching it happen in real time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because what it really made me, I started like a pretty intense yoga practice while I was doing this book, and I was like, and I'm a big gardener, and that stuff just like super expanded. I just realized that there's something just so manipulative about the way that electronic media works. And the more I worked on this story and the more I sort of understood what has happened in media, I was just like, I wanted to have less and less to do with it, to be totally honest. I was like, I'm going to meet with my friends in real life, and I'm going to do stuff with my hands, and I'm going to like do lots of mind body, stuff. And I'm going to get away from this medium that just seems to inherently make people like agitated and afraid, and it's more than just, the way the content works, but it does it as well. But there's something about just the electronicness of it and the way you're sort of focused on this little thing in front of your face that it makes your body feel like you're in some kind of like dangerous, anxiety producing situation, even when you're not. And I just don't think it's good for you. Right. So
yeah, it also weirdly seems like it somehow amplifies like the human's basic need for attention. Like we all want this attention, but somehow and maybe it's just because we know we could touch all these millions of lives. We could have all of these different eyes on us instead of just being like, I could make this one person who's sitting in front of me laugh. I could make millions of people laugh.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's part of it or if that's just my weird interpretation of it.
Well, I mean, to me, that's the part of the internet that's just like like my generation or whatever. I mean, I remember just being like, why the hell would I want to put my picture on the internet? When at first, I'm just like, that is the weirdest thing I have ever heard. Like my first like Facebook picture was like a picture of a dresser that I put on the sidewalk for someone to take for free, right? Yeah, the idea of like millions of people around, I'm just like, ugh, I don't, that just seems bizarre to me, frankly. Like I think that's a very strange, and the thing is, you're never gonna, I think I say somewhere in the book, like that system is never gonna love you back,
Never.
like never, ever, and trying to get your sort of identity and feeling of self-worth and all of that from like random internet strangers seems to be, that's just like a ludicrous and incredibly, like, I don't know, like mental health destroying thing to do, I think.
Yeah. It's an empty bucket that is bottomless. You can never fill it.
Yeah, no, you can never, ever, 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 ever fill it. Yeah, for sure.
It's an awful, awful system. And I noticed you have no social media.
Well, I mean, I went on Blue Sky, but I was like, I'll go. Now it's sort of turning back into like what social media always turned. It was like okay for like 2 weeks there,
Yep.
But yeah, I remember when I first got the book deal and I was like in a Zoom meeting with my editor and agent and everybody, and I was like, and the minute this book comes out, I am erasing myself from the internet, and they just all got this look of horror on their faces. But one thing is good though, because now, I mean, authors used to put it in your contract, I think, that you had to be on, and now they're like, you do not have to do that unless you're comfortable with it, because it doesn't really do anything other than make you feel insecure. I don't know. It's just like I don't know.
Well, I've talked to a lot of writers about this and friends and stuff, because I've worked in marketing and stuff and was a copywriter, still kind of am, but so much of social media marketing is empty clicks and likes, and getting it to actually reflect like positively on the thing you're trying to like so many people just move past it and gloss over it, and it's just these like empty interactions that don't really lead to much.
No, they don't. And there's, I don't know how many followers you're supposed to have before things actually, someone might actually see your post or whatever. So it's just kind of, I was glad that that was no longer. It's interesting because I've talked to people who work, because I'm an editor. I've worked as an editor at universities and that kind of thing for a while. So I interact with like the communications people sometimes, and
Yeah.
I've talked to more than one person who's just like, oh boy, another social media format that will put stuff on and will do zero to do anything
Yep.
other than say, oh, see, we're on Blue Sky too. Like, I don't know. So I think it was kind of funny, and not just people my age, like younger people who were like, yeah, this doesn't really do anything.
Yeah, it's this weird performative, like, it's just a performance. It's this weird performance that we're all pretending means something other than what it actually means. It's so weird.
Yeah. No, it's very weird. I'm looking forward for it to be finally fading, which I think it will at some point. But
it will. So were you recording all of your interviews? Were you doing all audio interviews?
Yeah. And at first, I went through a couple different iterations of stuff. I ended up just like either doing, Zoom calls because the audio is better, or just like recording it on my phone, just using a voice memo or whatever. I didn't do anything fancy.
So is there any way, like, did you think at all about doing an audio version that incorporates any of those, or is that?
Yeah, if there's some producer out there that wants to take 100 billion tons of interviews, some of which are like really terrible quality, and like sort through like 40,000 hours of stuff. I know a podcast producer in town who's actually done some really great stuff, and she might be, but we'd have to get, I don't know, someone would have to pay a lot of money to do it, because it would be a slog. But there's some great stuff in there.
Yeah, I'm sure. And condensing all of that stuff down, how did you go about it? Like, what was your process? How did you even turn? Because I know you didn't record like just 10 minutes with one person.
No.
Like,
no, it was hours. I didn't get lost track of many hours. Otter AI was, it's like my advertisement for Otter. Like, it's creepy now. It's like way creepier now than it used to be. But it's a great transcription program, and that saved my absolute life. Back when I very first started doing it, I actually was doing the more sort of manual transcription. I was just like, this is going to take me a freaking century, right? And Otter was great because I read very fast, and so it's a way for me to just zip through stuff very quickly. I mean, it does make mistakes, so I would go back and listen, but Otter was super helpful. And I've worked on a number of history projects that had like about 1 million moving parts, and I had to like sort of select the most important parts and put them together in something resembling a narrative. And so like I just did that again for this. So yeah.
So how different is your writing outside of this book than what you did here? Was this an easy like transition for you to write this book, or how different has your writing been before now?
I mean, I did a lot of creative writing, creative nonfiction, and then I stopped publishing for a long time, and then I went to grad school and got brainwashed into academic writing, and so it's taken me a while to like get that out of me, but doing this helped a lot. I also got involved in this playwriting group here in town
awesome.
For the year or two before, and definitely when I started like the oral history part, I was like, oh, well, this is just a play. I'm writing a play, right? And so, but that mentality kind of continued into it, so yeah, I don't know. I think all of those things had to do with like the sort of style in the end.
So you're writing plays right now?
No, I mean, not at the moment. But it was fun to experiment with that. I realized that I've been sort of thinking in dialogue like forever. The weird thing that I started doing was writing science fiction stories.
What? That's awesome.
Yeah. I haven't published anything yet, but I started, I've always been like a science fiction person, more like a Margaret Atwood or like Doris Lessing style, I think. And I just started writing these weird stories that had to do with other, I don't know, it was like sort of my downtime. I was like, I'm just going to write this weird story. And that was really fun. So I think and I don't know, I really became really impressed with the Onion's process and how they throw away, 90% of what they come up with. And that's so important as a writer. I mean, I write long anyway, my first draft of this book was like 2.5 times longer than it was supposed to be, so I just cut the crap out of it.
Well, no, that's so interesting because it came in, what is it? It's like it's 300, 298 before the afterword.
Yeah.
So 2.5 times longer than that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of that is just like, like filler and like stuff, but that's always been, that's just the way I write, I am like, oh, and then this and blah blah and tangent and blah blah. Like sometimes I'm going to write this like very elaborate like Victorian style novel that goes off in like 500 different directions, and no one will want to publish it. But yeah, I'm really I like cutting. I think I have decent cutting skills. That's what I do because I'm also an editor. I worked as an editor for a long time. And worked with and I've worked with a lot of academics, and like you can easily cut 75% of anything written by an academic, and like you're left with. And I'm sorry, like some of my best friends are professors, but that's just like
that's the pull quote.
That's what it is. That's how you're sort of trained to think and do, and there's all these qualifications and blah blah blah. But you could like strip so much of that out and just get to the meat of it, and that's sort of what I just sort of did that to myself.
So that answers my question then. That editing is it painful for you? You're an editor, not painful at all.
No, I mean it's just craft, you know. I mean,
Yeah.
I like to do pottery sometimes, like throw pots or whatever, and like in the trimming process, and like it's a toy. You know, whenever I meet like sort of a young writer who is thinks that like the first thing they put on a page is like the final thing, I'm like no. I write 20. I mean, I bet every chapter of this book probably went through 20 revisions, like many revisions. That's totally normal.
That's something I struggled with growing up and writing when I was younger, is that the idea that I'm, finished when I write the thing, and then I'm like, okay, there's the whole story. How early did you arrive at that mindset? And how long have you been an editor, I guess, would go along with that?
Oh, I mean, I've been an editor for ages. I mean, I was the Onion's copy editor.
Yeah.
Which is different. I mean, I was like 20. I was like 19 years old, right? I did not know what I was doing, although I was taking journalism class at that time. But then I was, the Stranger's editor in chief when I was 25, and I've been, basically the short version is that I got into academic editing because I had the training in it, and also it was one of the places where I could actually make some decent money, and so like whenever people are writers or editors, I'm like, don't go work for a publisher, go work for like a hospital, go work for a university, because you'll make twice as much money. You get to go home at 5, and you'll get, they usually places have good benefits. I mean, I guess get really pragmatic about these things. But no, I've been an editor for decades. Yeah.
I mean, that is great advice for writers and editors, like finding a place with that stability. Like, I'm sure it's awesome being an editor of an alt weekly, but knowing what I know from working at a local newspaper, knowing what I know about how the Onion is like, or was, I don't know now, but like flying by the seat of their pants to like get the edition ready for the day. And it doesn't mean you get to go home at 5.
Right. Yeah, exactly. No, I mean, I was up till, 2 a.m. just routinely, at the Stranger, while making $250 a week. So
yay.
Yay. Yeah.
All for art.
Exactly.
So I'm curious then about the writing process of this. And I talk about this a lot with people who have sort of dual roles. So did you even try to divorce yourself from the editor side of you as you were writing this? Or were you just like, nah, I'm an editor, I'm just going to write, and I know that as I'm going, I'll maybe kind of edit some of the stuff, even if you write long? Like, how's that sort of duality work inside you?
Yeah, I mean, I can go to the writer mode. I mean, I identified as a writer, more than I identify as an editor. And I used to be like, oh, well, if I'm an editor, does that mean I'm a bad writer?
Yeah.
Or like the other way around, But I can go to the writer brain like pretty easily. I guess what the editor part does is make me really, and I'm really glad I had the experience at the Stranger, back in my 20s, because it really made me understand that like the vast majority of editing, it's not personal, it's not an attack, it's not, if you get a good editor is like a great film director, right? Or like an orchestra director. You really want that person to be in there and on your side. But just as a writer, like I can definitely kind of let that go, because I also know that the writer side needs to go a little crazy and try different stuff and not care what anybody thinks and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And then I kind of bring in the editor part later.
I'm so interested by how you're putting words on a page. Like, are you doing it on your phone? Are you doing it longhand? How are you actually getting words on a page?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just like typing
Yeah.
in Word, but I'm a big journal writer, and I think it is actually so important for me at least to write with a pen on paper, right? Like, and it totally activates a part of your brain that just does not happen when you're typing, and so I filled like billions of journals while writing this, so I'm basically just like writing continually,
Yeah.
and then sometimes now hopefully I'll be able to keep doing it, I didn't, because like I said, I didn't publish for a long time. I kind of went into my little writer cave for about 20 years there, and now I'm coming out though. So I hope another one will happen pretty soon. So
well, yeah, I was going to ask about that. Like, so now that this finishes and is out and you're getting to talk about it, are you on, like, is there something on deck that you're working on, or are you just sort of looking?
No, I mean, I have, as far as like, serious nonfiction projects, I actually got a National Endowment for the Humanities grant for the next project, which is I'm just resurrecting an old graduate school project that has absolutely nothing to do with comedy in any way. It is a history. It's how life support technology changed American death. So I'm going from like comedy to tragedy, I guess, or
Yeah.
something like that. And I realized I was like, what the heck do these things have in common? But I'm really interested in technological systems. I'm very interested
Yeah.
in how technology has affected society, and something as universal and as personal, as the way you die has been totally altered by technology in the past 50 years. And there's just some interesting and very complicated questions that come up with all of that. So I still haven't kind of figured out like the voice for that yet, but that's a project coming up. But also, I don't know, I'm like, I'd love to publish some of these science fiction stories. I have no idea if they're any good or not, but I would like to do that. I think that would be fun.
What about a novel? Is that something,
Oh yeah.
or?
Yeah, I mean, I got like two or three, started unfinished novels sitting around. A couple of them are
Of
SFB.
course.
I'm not like I don't really like realistic fiction, really. Like there has
Yeah.
to be something strange happening either in the style or the content. I'm not, but you have to write one of those before someone gives you a book deal for them, though. So we'll see. Yeah, yeah. And I'm like a sandwich generation person. I've got kids, and I've got like an elderly parent that I help out, and I'm a single parent, and like blah blah blah. So but my kids are finally old enough to make their own mac and cheese. So
Yeah.
like we'll see what happens.
So what for the book, what was the hardest part of it?
Just having enough money to live on while I was doing it.
Yeah.
Just having the time and the space to do it. Writing for me is not hard at all. But the practical reality of like a writing life has been the thing. Like I don't have a trust fund. I don't have a spouse with a lot of money. Like I do have a writing shed now though out in the yard, which
Heck
is like
yeah.
awesome. Yay!
Jealous.
And I like finish it. Yeah, it's people, other writers see it. They're like, oh, I want one of those. But I finished. Like I'm handy. Like so I did like I did like the side. It's finished the interior, put down the floor. And did all that kind of stuff. So no, the hardest part for me has always been the practical reality stuff, and also for me, like kind of taking a step back through this door and being like, okay, like I am going to put myself out there now, and we'll just see what happens, because that was something that I had to be kind of internal about that for a long time, but now I'm not, and so we'll see what happens.
So when you were being internal, like, is it because you got to a point where you were like, I don't want anyone to read my writing, or I just don't want to be the like public face of my writing?
I mean, a little bit of both. It was also, I mean, like my, raising kids and, being it's like, it's just, there were just things that were just sort of like on a practical level that were difficult. But like, yeah, I think that, I mean, this sounds weird. Like in my 20s, I would publish stuff in The Stranger, other things, and people would sometimes have like really strong reactions to it. I mean, they were really like positive, but it was like, and that really, really wigged me out, and I
Really?
just was, yeah. I was just like, I can't, I didn't understand. Yeah, that's the other. Yeah, I was just really, really uncomfortable with it, and so like I was just like, and then like I responded to that by like moving to an island in the Puget Sound into a cabin, like with anyway.
Well, we don't have to talk about that if you don't want to, but that is.
Yeah. I don't know. I just was like, there's just some stuff I wanted to figure out, and I don't know. Yeah. I just feel differently about it. There were just some things I had to go through in my life personally, I
Yeah.
think, in my own sort of personal development. And so I feel different about that now though. So
Do you think part of the thing that helped you maybe change your mind or how you felt about it is that publishing and the world changed in a bunch of huge ways in between those years?
well, it's funny now we were talking about social media, right? And I was like, oh my God, thank God I missed all of that.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
like I was talking, there was a great editor I talked to who was the first editor of Our Dumb Century, David Cashin, who's like, you know, he's like my age, a little older even. And I had a great conversation with him and he was like, you know, I really miss the days when an author they just could be introverts and write their book and they didn't have to do anything. You know, you just like write your book and then you put it out there and you don't have to put on a show and you don't have to do the and the blah and the blah. And I was like, yeah, I want to be one of those writers, you know? I mean, I used to be on the radio. So like, I actually really enjoying like the radio and podcast interviews I've been doing. That's been really fun. So I like that part, but yeah, I guess I've definitely been like, thank God, like social media is like circling the drain, you know,
Yeah.
because I just got to kind of skip all of that. That's been great.
Well, it's funny because in the last interview I did, we talked because I interviewed an agent and we talked about the necessity of social media for authors and how you can't be JD Salinger anymore. You can't be that person who's just like, here's my story and now I'm going to go. And I don't want an Instagram account and I have one and it's because I feel like I have to.
Right. Yeah.
And I'm just so I am at that point where I'm like angry that I have to have one, but
Yeah.
I know if I want to promote my work that there's an aspect of that stuff that I'm not really going to be able to escape because of I really do think because I'm a elder millennial that I'm in an age range where it's expected of me. Does that sound weird?
No. I totally get it. Yeah. I mean, it was interesting because I didn't really understand how that worked for millennials until I did this book because there was, you know, in the very early social media, like people actually did like make these amazing connections
Yeah.
and people would go from like nothing to like famous, you know, like really, or like known for like a particular cool thing. And I think there was this little moment there that was, I mean, it was sort of like alt weeklies were for my generation, maybe like it was really important. But then it changed again,
Yeah.
you know? So yeah,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, part of me is like, you know, like people can, I don't know, they're in print, like print lasts longer than digital, right? Like, I'm like, if somebody picks up this book in like 100 years and is like, oh, look what these people were doing back in the old days, you know,
Yeah.
like that would be great. Cause that happens to me, you know, like
Oh, yeah.
you go to a used bookstore and you find some old book and I'm like, hey, writer who died 75 years ago, I'm reading your book,
Yeah.
you know, which is cool. So
I do love that aspect of it so much. And that part, like, I'm curious if you had, or if you have enough research, like, because when I emailed to potentially have you on the show, one of the things I said was that I loved that it is this history of print journalism and the ways in which the media landscape changed between 1988 and, you know, present day. Is that a thing that you have any interest in exploring even further?
I mean, not so much. I mean, someone's like, "Oh, you should write a history of alt weeklies." I'm like, "Nah, I'm not going to do that." But
Why
I mean,
not?
one thing, because if someone paid me a lot of money, maybe, you know, but
Sure.
this is, you know, but it's interesting because when you were saying that, I was like, right, because I'm also a public historian and I've worked on, and not long before this, even like while I was doing this, I was finishing up this big like website archiving project for the National Library of Medicine, and you know, learning how how incredibly temporary digital stuff is,
Yeah.
you know, and I've worked with many archivists and librarians for other history projects, and I was like, yeah, I mean, it sounds weird, like I also wanted to get down on paper like the history of all this digital stuff that is honestly not going to be here,
Yeah.
you know, and there's going to be this weird, I don't know how this is going to work. You need to get like, you know, stuff that can bring back, you know, computers from 100 years ago or whatever, you know, to like see stuff that's like the history of our world, you know, because it's all digital right now. And I was like, I just want to get something on paper because it honestly will probably last longer.
It is so interesting how finite digital information actually is, and this idea
Yeah.
that the internet is forever, and the websites like the Internet Archive, and well,
Hmm.
even just like video game, like
Yeah.
watching so many video game companies get pissed off that people are quote unquote pirating games that are like 40 years old at this point and they are not
Yeah.
selling anywhere. It's just so interesting to see the ways in which digital is failing people after this like massive promise that it was like our infinite future.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. You said that very well. Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I mean, to me, it's like, computers. They're a tool. I mean, they're like a giant data processing tool, and they're really useful
Yeah.
for that. They're the James Webb Space Telescope does a lot of the people working on that down in Baltimore. Like the computers are super useful for that kind of stuff. There might be some interesting medical things that are happening, but I'm like, why are computers part of our social life? Like, that's just bizarre. It should, like, we don't need a computer for that. That's ridiculous, So,
Yep.
yeah, yeah.
Well, I think your book's fantastic. I think everyone should read it. It is not just a fun, funny, informative history of who The Onion was and what it is now, but of print and digital journalism between the end of the 80s and present day. So thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Funny Because It's True is out right now in hardcover by Christine Wenc. Thank you so much to Christine for coming by and chatting about the history of The Onion, what it was, what it became, all of that fun stuff. It is a great book. I really do think if you enjoy The Onion or just any of the stuff that we talk about, you'll love the book. So make sure you check it out. Swing by austinrwilson.com to check out my work. And yeah, make sure you subscribe to the show on whatever platform you listen to it. It's on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all those things. Rate it, review it, share it, and help other people find the show. It means a ton to me that you listen and spend any time with the show. I've got more planned and more on the way, so come back for those. I'll talk to you soon.